The history of the performance right in the United States is quite interesting. Um, Songwriters went to Congress at the turn of the century to get a performance right. It was growing in Europe. In France, performance rights had come into being in the 1850s, SACEM. And then in Germany, GEMA, Richard Strauss, great waltz king, led the movement there in the 1890s. And in the United States, it was the heirs of Stephen Foster. He had written all these great songs, Old Folks at Home, Swanee River, Dream of Jeannie with the light brown hair. John Philip Sousa, the March King, they came to Congress. Their works were being played in public. Stephen Foster had died penniless. And they said, we need to have a performance right. And so Congress gave them a performance right, and it was passed, and then it was in the 1909 Act, it was codified that a musical work would have a performance right. When something was played in public, the songwriter would have the right to get paid. Sound recordings really weren't in existence at the time. There were Edison cylinders, but there was really no industry at the time. There was really no, business the way it existed 20 years later. So, come the 1920s, and the recording industry is now becoming a pretty vibrant industry. The radio industry is also becoming a vibrant industry. The first commercial on radio was in 1922. In 1923, the National Association of Broadcasters was formed, and their formation, in large part, had to do with the fact that ASCAP was now coming to radio stations asking for money for songwriters. The broadcasters had a number of different responses. One was to try to get ASCAP shut down. They went to the Justice Department claiming they were a monopoly. They went to Congress and tried to get legislation passed. And they started their own tax-free music bureau. This was for music publishers who weren't big and powerful and didn't have big songwriters like Gershwin, Cole Porter, John Philip Sousa, or Stephen Foster. They said, we'll play your music if you'll give it to us for free. Ultimately, the public weighed in and said, no, we want to hear the good stuff. We want to hear the valuable stuff. And so the broadcasters started paying. So in the 1930s, radio started to realize they didn't need to keep paying the performers. They could just play their records. And in fact, a couple of big band leaders were upset with this. In the 1930s, performers, upset with the fact that radio stopped paying them, actually asked their record companies to put on the label, not authorized for radio play. Paul Whiteman did this, and Fred Waring did this. These were two of the most popular big band leaders of the 30s. But radio played it anyway, even though it said not authorized for radio play. Both big band leaders sued radio, and both of them won in the lower courts. Paul Whiteman ended up losing in federal court because there was no copyright in the sound recording. So that started a campaign in 1939. Now, obviously, we had the war intervene, and people had more important things to worry about. But in the 50s, Sinatra picked up the banner for performers. In the 1960s, with another big band leader, Stan Kenton. In the 70s, the recording industry tried again to get a performance right. In fact, finally in 1972, the recording industry finally got a copyright in the sound recording because there was a lot of piracy and bootlegging going on. But the broadcasters insisted that Congress not give them a full copyright, so we didn't get a performance right even though we got a copyright. We got a copyright, but it wasn't a full copyright. We didn't have all the rights. In 1976, Congress was overhauling the Copyright Act. Okay?
Yeah.
So in 1976, Congress updated the copyright laws, and the recording industry once again asked for a performance right. The broadcasters, of course, didn't want to pay, and so they asked Congress for a study. So Congress asked the Register of Copyrights to do a study, and the Ringer Report was issued in 1978. And the Ringer Report said U.S. performers, like performers everywhere else in the modern world, should have a performance right and be paid when radio used their recordings. Still, Congress didn't do anything. There were a few more performance rights bills in the early 80s, but none got traction and went very far. In '88, Sinatra again started a new campaign to try to get artists united to create a coalition for a performance right. But it wasn't until 1995 that a coalition of recording artists and record companies were able to get a digital performance right passed for streaming music. and this applied to internet, satellite, and cable music services. First law was passed in 1995, the Digital Performance Right and Sound Recordings Act. It was the 1998 Digital Millennium Copyright Act, the DMCA of 1998, clarified that non-subscription webcasting was also included in this performance right. So now we have a situation in 2009 where every radio platform, whether it's on cable, those blue screen channels up on the cable dial of your cable television, whether those blue screen channels they pay, whether it's internet radio who pays, whether it's satellite radio who pays, all radio platforms pay except for the broadcasters, the terrestrial radio stations. They even pay when they stream their signals online. So if you're listening to a broadcaster from their website, they're paying performers. If you're listening over the air, they are not. So that's where we are in 2009, and it's time for a change.